everybody. I'm Katie Wright from the AV Club.
And I'm Katie Penzie-Moog from the AV Club.
And we've got Katie and Katie here today talking about Season 8, Episode 1 of Game of Thrones. Something that I was really struck by on this premiere episode were all the parallels to Season 1, Episode 1. Like the story's really coming full circle, and we're going back to the very beginning of it. And part of that is the episode titles, right?
Yes. The very first episode of the very first Game of Thrones is called Winter is Coming. And this episode is called Winterfell. And of course, Winter is Coming is the house motto of Family Stark, which resides at Winterfell.
Do you think there's maybe a little bit of wordplay there too, or maybe that's just where my mind goes, is like winter fell.
That's right.
It done fell.
It done fell.
It's already fallen.
And the fact that winter is coming, it was setting it up like so many things did in the very, very first episode of the show. The sigil winter is coming, or I'm sorry, the motto winter is coming is setting up the entire show. And now we have come, winter is here.
Yeah.
It's here. So they can't use that motto anymore.
Yeah,
it's here.
And by now, like, it's totally the culmination of all these different storylines. Like, I felt like a lot of characters who, kind of the last characters who didn't meet up again in Season 7 are meeting up in this first episode, and everything is really, like, set up and in motion. And part of that is, Daenerys arriving at Winterfell with Jon Snow, with the army. And this is one thing where that explicitly parallels the first episode, where you have the shot of the boy winding through the crowd and then climbing up the tree. And if I recall correctly, that is almost exactly the same shot as in the first episode. That's right,
yeah. It's not in the very beginning of the very first episode, but I think that the boy climbing was meant to have a lot of viewers remember the very first episode of Bran climbing up onto the tower and how he's always climbing around stuff, and now there is another little boy who's climbing around Winterfell to see the procession, which also the procession is obviously a callback to the very first episode. We see the Stark family lining up to greet the Baratheon / Lannister family, and in this episode we have the same reduced Stark family now lining up to meet Daenerys.
Yeah, and it's a homecoming in one way because Jon Snow's coming back, but he's coming back with Daenerys, which is, a really big factor in the dynamics of this episode. And another thing that I thought was interesting about that scene, and also a callback, was the way that Arya is standing in the crowd watching them go by, which is what she was doing in the very first episode also. Like, I'm not sure if I don't think it's really like infantilizing her because she's really a grown woman, but it's interesting that the family dynamics of her being the youngest and the one who's kind of like on the edges of the story is repeated this time around.
Yeah, in the first episode, she's away, and in both episodes, we get the same line of one of the Stark family members asking, "Where's Arya?"
Where's Arya?
Where's Arya?
Lurking somewhere.
And
everyone's like, "Oh, Arya."
In the first one, she runs back. She has a little helmet on.
Yeah.
And Ned is like, "Arya, take that helmet off." And she lines up with her family. And then, 8 seasons later, she's doing the same thing, but she's not hiding under a helmet.
Right.
She's standing up front, and she doesn't go back to join her family. So she is sort of this separate entity. Like, she's part of the Stark family, but they're showing us visually that she's always been sort of separate, and now she's she's claiming that separateness because she's not greeting Daenerys with the Stark family.
Yeah, but her family accepts her separateness. Then they're like, "Oh, well, that's just Arya. That's just how she is." And, when she was younger, she had this very, I guess, rebellious spirit where, she didn't want to do all the... I think I remember in the first episode they talk about doing embroidery, and Arya's so bored with it, she can't handle it.
She leaves to go shoot archery with the boys.
Totally.
Yeah.
And now she is also separate and kind of on the side, but as this like badass assassin figure.
And Sansa has kind of accepted that she's a weirdo.
Yeah, they accept her for who she is, which is at this point a creepy assassin.
Yes, bringer of death. So pivoting into something completely different is that we have a true throwback in this episode, which is the sex position.
What a season 1 callback!
Yes.
I know.
So season 1, we meet Tyrion for the first time, and he is getting his dick sucked in a brothel, having a good time in sort of the old school Tyrion mode of things. And now, and they got away from that. I think there was a lot of criticism around the show.
There was. I remember there being a lot of controversy about all the
women's
sex
naked
position.
bodies, yes, to have exposition over a sort of sex going on in the background.
Yeah, and they brought it back big time this time.
They brought it
like
back.
3 naked women.
Yes,
they
with
like
Bronn.
it almost felt like a little bit, not a fuck you to the audience, but a like, remember sex position?
Like, you know what? This is still Game of Thrones. We're still going to have an unnecessarily long scene of a dragon flying around just because we can. And we're also going to have some tits and Bronn.
Yeah.
Well, he does kind of get cock blocked, but
they don't get very far.
That. Yeah,
basically,
it's maybe a little less gratuitous than the opening season sex position.
I don't know. I thought having 3 naked ladies was extremely gratuitous. I wasn't mad about it, but it was very gratuitous.
So, side note, which is not related to the sort of way that this episode mirrors the very first episode, but Qyburn comes in. And
yes, you have a theory on this, which is it didn't occur to me.
My theory is that Qyburn comes in to tell Bronn that Cersei wants both Jaime and Tyrion to be dead, and that Bronn is the one to do it, which is crazy because he loves both those men.
Yeah, it's an interesting choice, and it's a very like latter period Queen Cersei kind of choice to make too, because she's all about basically forcing people to take sides.
Right. And so my theory is that I'm not sure Cersei did instruct Qyburn to go tell Bronn to kill her brothers. I think maybe Qyburn is acting out on his own, sort of like the way that we saw Littlefinger sort of manipulating family dynamics and manipulating the people around him. I think Qyburn is now the hand of the queen. He might be acting out on his own, because I can see Cersei wanting Tyrion to be dead, although she had the chance and didn't kill him in the season 7 finale. But I can never see her killing Jaime.
Well, she also, she also lied in the season 7 finale where she said, yeah, we'll send troops, and then she has no intention of doing so. I could see her telling Qyburn to kill Tyrion with a crossbow, and he threw the Jaime in as a little bit of a chaos element.
That's true. Okay, so getting back to...
Speaking of dead characters.
Yes. The crypt. There's a lot of parallels with the crypt beneath Winterfell in this episode and in the very first episode.
Now, in the very first episode, Robert and Ned go down to the crypt to talk about Lyanna Stark,
Lyanna Stark. And that, sort of rewatching the first episode again, it's incredible how they set up this thing that sort of seems tossed off. Like, oh, yes, Robert Baratheon loved Ned Stark's sister, Lyanna.
Right.
Robert's rebellion was sort of based on the fact that
I'd say
Rhaegar took her, and then it's sort of not explored for the rest of the show until, of course, we learn the truth, which is that they are Jon Snow's parents, and we see it again in this episode.
Well, it is interesting, and and John kind of, the way he responds to Samwell telling him the truth later in the episode is his first thought is, well, does that make my father a liar? And that's sort of an interesting retrospective look back on that, because the way that Robert and Ned talk about it at the very beginning, they don't really let on that this is a lie. And I wonder if the show changed tacks later, and originally that wasn't part of the original plan, or if they deliberately were
Robert didn't
obfuscating
know.
it.
Robert never knew.
Robert never knew.
He would have had that baby killed because it was the Targaryens' baby. And I think there is a shot where Ned is sort of in that first episode when they're in the crypt. Ned is like, yeah, totally, totally messed up how that all went
definitely.
Which in retrospect now is clear that he was hiding this secret for decades.
That makes sense, and it casts a new light on their relationship, the two of them.
Right.
Yeah.
Moving right along.
But in this episode also, we have a significant scene in the crypt, which I kind of tossed off, referred to, where John's down in the crypt looking at the statue of Ned, I believe. And then here comes Samuel Tarly, who falls down on his way in. Of course, poor Samuel Tarly.
Yeah, like did he trip
him.
on a bucket? Like what is he getting into?
I don't know, man.
There?
It's winter. There's always potholes in winter. We live in Chicago. We know this. Maybe he tripped on a pothole.
Yeah, stumbling around down there.
But he comes in to tell Jon Snow the truth that you were talking about, that his mother was Lyanna Stark and his father is Rhaegar Targaryen, which makes him the rightful king of Westeros. And I know that he was really just processing this information and he hasn't really thought it through yet. But I was a little struck by the fact that his reaction seems to be that he's the king again and not that he's having sex with his aunt.
Yeah, you would think that he would be, oh, I'm a Targaryen. That means the woman I've been having sex with
is my aunt.
A close relation.
Yes.
And you're right. He doesn't even seem to think that, or it's the secondary thought to his.
Maybe he just hasn't processed that thought yet. But Jon Snow is a little slow on the uptake in this episode, where it has been established that only a Targaryen can ride a dragon. So just the fact that he rode that dragon earlier, he should have picked up on that. But like we said, he's not always.
He's a little slow.
On the
uptake.
And you saw some parallels, speaking of Daenerys, in like the wedding procession that she had in the first episode and the arrival procession at Winterfell this time.
Totally.
Like, what do you think about that?
The very first episode is when she gets married to Khal Drogo. And there's this moment, she's putting away the eggs of the future dragons that she's been gifted, and she has to sort of walk through the Dothraki to join Khal Drogo on the horses. And she's just extremely uncertain and kind of afraid. She looks really nervous as she's walking through it. And just juxtaposing that to the way she rides into Winterfell in this episode, I think shows a really nice growth of that character. She's gone from, sort of someone who her brother was controlling, setting up this marriage that she didn't want to enter, and now she's doing everything on her own terms, riding side by side with Jon, and she's just very confident and queenly and like sitting up straight on that horse. And it's not a direct maybe parallel, but I think it does show how much she's grown over the last 8 seasons.
Yeah, and on the other side, we were talking about how Arya is in many ways still the same Arya, but Sansa's changed a lot.
Yes.
Since the first episode, where I remember she was really just kind of starstruck by seeing Jaime Lannister in the first episode, and this time she's just like, are you going to eat all my food? Because we had plans for this.
There's also the sort of Joffrey angle where she, in that very first episode, she's very young and she's watching the Lannisters come in, and she sees Joffrey and she's like, oh, he's so handsome. And
she could not care less now.
Now, her and Tyrion meet back up, which is weird because they were married once. And
yes, but he was... She has some like fondness for him in a weird, fucked up way.
And he mentions the purple wedding, and she's like, "Well, there were some good moments." Like she's talking about Joffrey, so she's grown an extreme amount from being
definitely
sort of starry-eyed over this attractive. I don't know, teenager. It's teens
crushing on teens is totally fine.
Totally fine. And now she is glad that he's dead. She's Lady of Winterfell. She's sort of an equal with Tyrion.
Well, I would say she even gets one over on Tyrion at the end, where she is like, I can't believe you trusted anything that Cersei said.
Oh yeah, she knows.
Yeah.
Like, the whole audience knew that Cersei would never do that.
Yeah.
And Sansa's seemingly the only one who also knows that Cersei would never send troops north.
Yes, there was some very satisfying Sansa Stark content in this episode, I felt like. And also later where Jon Snow says, Sansa thinks she's smarter than everybody else, and Arya says she's the smartest person I've ever met. It was like, I felt very satisfied by that.
Smarter than you, Jon Snow.
Yeah, and because I am, a noted horror movie weirdo, I also very much enjoyed when the show turned into Hannibal for a minute, and we had like a spiral wall of body parts.
Yes,
and a screaming zombie baby in the middle. That was incredible.
Talk us through what those body parts mean.
Okay, so this is something that is... The show did not telegraph this like at all. And you kind of have to... actually, you're the one that told me that is House Umber that they are in. I thought it was, when I watched the episode, I thought it was what was left of Eastwatch by the Sea, but it's not. It's House Umber. And all the crows and the wildlings have made their way down from the wall to House Umber. And it is shot like a horror movie, and then you have the big horror movie reveal of the spiral. And this is actually another callback to the very, very beginning of the show, the very first scene of the first episode. You have the, crows or wildlings?
It's crows.
Yeah, who are out north of the wall, and they find dead bodies laid out in the snow. And that one, the key to that one is the scene in season 7 where John and Danny go into the caves at Dragonstone, and they're looking at the kind of cave paintings inside the cave. And at one point, Jon Snow says, "What's that?" And there's a circle with a line through it and a spiral, like the one we saw, made of, again, I'm going to say it, body parts on the wall.
Metal.
It's so metal. And she says, "Oh, that's a symbol from the children of the forest." And so it's like a mystical symbol to them. And so it might have something to do with the White Walkers. Regardless, I don't think the true meaning of the symbol is known at this time, but it is an ancient symbol that dates back to the pre-wall days.
There's also, if you look closely at the new opening credits, we come down from the wall with the hole in it, and there's a tile effect of the sort of white snow being flipped over to a light blue tile, and that tile path leads from the broken wall to the Umber household, which is the sort of closest house to the wall.
Yeah, it's the furthest north, right?
I think, yes. And so that's kind of showing in the opening credits the White Walkers' progression. Like, they've reached this far south of the wall, and it's only a matter of time before they get to Winterfell.
And they're going to be metal as fuck.
Yeah.
And then there's one more parallel that we found. And this one, it's really interesting because we talked about the boy climbing the tree, and that starts the episode. And this is a bookend at the end of the episode. Now, Bran has just been sitting around. I saw somebody on Twitter call him a messy bitch who lives for drama, which I agree with, because he let everyone come to Winterfell with knowing all of this, and he didn't tell. He let them all get there before he told anybody. He's just going to blow up this party. So Bran's sitting there in the courtyard of Winterfell for most of the episode, just kind of sitting there staring at people and waiting for them to come up to him for mystical advice. Like, he's just kind of chills out in the courtyard all day. But it pays off for him at the very end of the episode when Jaime Lannister arrives at Winterfell, and there's Bran sitting in his spot waiting.
And that's a nice mic drop for that episode, because it's also the way the very first episode of the show ends, is with Jaime shoving Bran out the window.
Yeah.
So it's a real full circle moment for the show.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that moment, I remember watching the very first episode and being like, "Oh wow, they will do anything on this show." But this one, they hold off the satisfaction. We have to wait and see what Bran's gonna do to Jaime Lannister, or maybe Arya.
And like everything in this show, we are seeing the consequences of these actions that these characters do. It might take 8 seasons to get there, but there are consequences for pushing a little boy out a window.
Finally.
So I think we can end it there. That's all we have. Maybe there's more things that our viewers have found paralleling this episode. We'd love to hear
to see that. So Katie, what do you think's going to happen? Like, where do you think this season is going? I think it's really interesting that a lot of the locations have been burned to the ground by now, and so basically all we have left is Winterfell and King's Landing. Like, everywhere else has been destroyed, basically.
Or the people running the houses have been killed.
Right. There's no reason to set a scene there at this point.
It does seem like Winterfell is going to be where much of the action is.
I assume that's where the fight with the army of the dead is going to be. Daenerys says as much in the episode.
The expense that they're going to make this set for Winterfell is must be astronomical.
Yes,
so
of
they're going to
course,
get some good use out of it.
Yeah, and there was that shot of the dragon flying over Winterfell this episode, which I thought was cool in a nerdy kind of way, because I was like, oh, well, there's the layout. You can really see the layout.
Just like the map in the opening credits.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So, yeah, that's everything that we found in the first episode of Season 8 of Game of Thrones. It takes you all the way back to Season 1, Episode 1. It'll be interesting to see how all these threads come together in the end. Obviously, everyone's dying to know. Interesting's kind of an understatement, but we'll be back next week with breaking down Episode 2.
Yep. Bye.
Yeah. Bye.